What you're about to watch is all done without the use of mods, texture packs, or any additional editing, and instead uses around 2,000 command blocks. This is a full playthrough of Chapter 1 from my Security Breach RUIN map fully recreated in Minecraft. There's a lot of cool gameplay mechanics to cover in this video, so with that being said, I hope that you enjoy the gameplay. Everything that you just saw is chapter 1 of my Security Breach RUIN map fully recreated in Minecraft. There were no mods, no texture packs, and no additional editing, and all of it was done by only using command blocks. This is just one section of many more to come, but this should give you an idea of what the finished map is going to look like. So without further ado, let's take a look at how I got all of this to work. Before taking a look at any of the new stuff, I want to quickly mention that I won't be going over things shown off in a previous video, such as the flashlight, the phase wrench conduits, or any of the doors. So if you want to know how those work in more detail, I highly recommend checking out the rest of the series. Also, if you do enjoy these kinds of videos, please make sure that you're subscribed with notifications turned on, so that way you know the next time I upload and don't miss out on any of my future Minecraft projects. But picking up right after where the prologue left off, the very first sequence that plays after entering Monty Golf is the Cassie's dad jump scare at the entrance to the stomach room. And this is where the first out of many armor stand models appear, as Maskbot has 9 total armor stands that make up his model, with an extra 10th one for the mask in his hand. A single command block chain teleports each of them together around a base center stand, that way everything holds together while the animation is playing. There are only 16 command blocks that play the 16 frames of this animation. Now the reason why that number is so low compared to any others is because only the head is being rotated, as the rest of the model can't be seen, with the player forced to look at Maskbot's face. All of this powers when a command block detects when the player is at a certain set of coordinates, which then starts a scoreboard timer and changes the armor stand's head rotation when the tick hits a certain number. The same concept also carries over to when Cassie's dad deactivates after taking the mask from his hand. The start of this is just as simple as another command block is looking for if the armor stand is no longer wearing a player head, meaning I've now got it in my inventory. And after a couple of voice lines appear in the chat, the core mechanic of the entire map has now been unlocked, as I'm able to wear and use the Vanny mask. Now the mask is one of those things that's already been in the map for a while now, but it's gone through a lot of changes with the way that it works. Originally, I just had to equip the mask like a normal helmet. Then after that, I made a sneak detector to make it more convenient for the player to use. However, with this latest version, it just needs me to left click as I'm holding the item, which then powers the system to make all of this work. The main command block for this has stayed the exact same this entire time, as what it's doing is teleporting me 85 blocks down from my exact position to take me down to the augmented version of the Pizzaplex. This is a completely separate build underneath the main one, where every single attraction has a copy of itself with all of the changes needed when wearing the mask. The inspiration for this actually comes from RUIN itself, which works with the exact same idea. Now I've mentioned that I just have to left click to put on the mask, but I didn't exactly say how and why. So from now on and throughout the rest of the map, an interaction entity is going to teleport directly above my head when I'm holding the mask item in my hand. This is a feature that I've only started using relatively recently, however it might be one of the greatest things ever added to Minecraft. Interactions let me send a command block output whenever I left or right click over them, and can be sized to whatever size I need. So to make sure that I don't miss the hitbox for this, a 1x1 block sized interaction is used to power the teleport commands. At the same time that this happens, a new scoreboard called AR World is then going to be set to 1. Now this is a very important scoreboard for almost all of the command blocks, so keep this in mind as I'm going through the rest of them. For now though, this scoreboard is going to cycle to 1 when I put on the mask, and then get set back to 0 when I use it again, which then powers another command that teleports me directly back up to the original build again. It's a very simple system that uses a very simple and cool mechanic to work. That however doesn't come even close to the next feature, which is absolutely my favorite part of this entire map so far, with those being the wet floor bots. These things are absolutely amazing, as they just sit there in the corner minding their own business, as they always watch you no matter where you go. And though their models aren't that big in scale, each one is made up of 9 separate armor stands, with 4 of them just being for their look mechanic. Like other models, they're all teleported around a base armor stand, however there's an additional one on top of that that's always rotated to face towards the player. As I move around, the body armor stand rotates along with the base one to keep everything together. Now with that said though, since I'm able to fly up and down while the armor stand is still looking at me, the model itself starts to fall apart since it's relative to the base armor stand. So 2 more armor stands with no gravity are added for the base to look at, which keeps everything on the same Y level while the model is spinning around. It's a little more complicated to set up, but it's still one of my favorite things that I've ever made, and I don't know anyone who doesn't like these guys. So let's take a look at how to kill them when putting on the AR mask and using the Phas wrench. The first thing you'll have noticed is how they change when in AR mode, which is simply done by swapping out 2 different pairs of armor when the scoreboard I was talking about earlier matches one or the other. The deactivation is then triggered when an interaction in front of the pat is left clicked while I'm holding the Phas wrench in my hand and within a 1.5 block radius from the entity. This also lets a text prompt appear to tell me what to do, while also powering the animation after that. More importantly though, the chain of command blocks holding the model together gets turned off to stop it from looking towards me, before a scoreboard gets set to 1 which keeps track of how many pats I've deactivated so far. Of course this will eventually lead to the secret room in Body Bowl, but I've still got a bit to go before I get there. Just note that every time I deactivate a floor bot, another kill gets added to the counter. And they are called souls in game, so it is considered to be a living thing. This finally brings us to the start of the main Monty Golf room, where right away there's already a new mechanic to look at, with that being the camera stations. These are placed all across the ruined pizzaplex and let the player view the attraction from different angles to either lure an animatronic or find an anomaly. And of course, this wouldn't be a CuppaTeaExe video without, you guessed it, another new camera design. Now while using an interaction or an entity to open up the cameras isn't new, I've kept that concept throughout the rest of the system instead of having to throw an item from my inventory. When opening up the cameras, I'm instantly given an item to go back and 5 more items for the cameras themselves. When I hold one of the named items and click on the interaction in front of me, a command block then teleports me to the coordinates for the corresponding camera. This also replaces the item with a highlighted one, so that way I know which camera that I'm currently looking at. And along with the new items themselves, I've also teleported the Cassie model from the intro to stand in front of the camera, and also made a small HUD to show what I'm doing, as well as the area that the cameras are set at. Some camera items have different uses than others, such as cameras 2 and 3, which both have a built-in intercom system. This is a separate item at the end of the hotbar, which is going to lure Monty over when I click on the same interaction. All of these Monty encounters do the exact same thing, where the model teleports to an area and then moves along a set path, before then disappearing from the build completely. In fact, this entire sequence is completely optional, as Monty isn't going to kill you here and doesn't even spawn even if visible at a camera. However, this specific camera system is still very important, as it's the first time that a hidden camera appears to unlock one of the doors during the mimic chase. And this is part of the actual build and not just a copy of it, meaning I'm teleported across the entire world just to look at this camera. However, you don't need to worry about any of this for the time being, as I've still got a lot to do before starting on chapter 9. Moving on through the golf course itself, there isn't a lot of gameplay to go over, but instead are a lot of added sound effects, particles, and flickering lights to give the area a proper ambience. Some of these are just for decoration, but others sometimes indicate when I need to use the AR mask to go through an object blocking the path. Eventually at the top floor balcony though is the first security node, which is another core mechanic throughout the rest of this map. In the overworld, these are going to be indicated by having blue particles floating above the floor, which are then going to turn into a full-scale model when I put on the mask. I'm actually very happy with how these rabbit-shaped nodes turned out, as they only use 3 armor stands, yet manage to look very similar to what I'm recreating. Above it is another armor stand with red-stained glass on its head, and this is what tells us how many child nodes need to be deactivated before getting access to the parent one. To start with, the child nodes are made up of random objects around the area which are going to glow red when shining the flashlight onto them. This simply works by having the particle command only power if I'm in the AR world with the flashlight item in my hand. This is just like how in Ruin, where shining the light onto a node will then cause it to turn red. Now since these blocks won't do anything on their own, each child node has an interaction entity over it, so that way I can properly interact with it to disable it by using the Phas wrench. By doing this, the scoreboard for that child node has now been set to 1, which then changes the color of the particles to turn blue. And if all of the child nodes have been turned off, it will then unlock the main security node as well. Now, not only is there a text that shows off how many there are and how many have been disabled, but every node has glass around it, which will also turn blue as each one has been turned off. And this is what finally leads to the minigame itself once I interact with the main conduit. These are all of the commands just for the first 5 security nodes, where just like with the conduits, each one represents a different security node. However, at the very top of it all is this smaller platform here, which is how the main controls of the minigame are set up. So instead of having me look around or use different items in my hotbar to create a path, I'm instead going to be using my normal walking WA, S and D keys while standing in the middle of these 4 interactions here, which are going to be detecting my movement. A while ago on a live stream, I played another Minecraft map called A Day to Remember, which blew my mind with its entire gameplay being in 2.5D. Now, I do these kinds of live streams every weekend where I'll either play through someone else's map and take a look at the command blocks, or I'll be working on features for my own projects. So if the command block side of things is something that you're interested in, I highly recommend stopping by one. Going back to the 2.5D mechanic though, the way this is done is by having 4 interaction entities just a few pixels away from me, meaning the moment I move in any direction, a command block can detect it whenever I get close enough. To then keep me standing between them all, the first command that powers is a teleport command, which is going to move me right back to the center, meaning I'm able to keep on using my keybinds while not actually moving around. This again is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, and it's one of the reasons why I find making games in Minecraft so cool in the first place. So now that the inputs have been set up, the next command is then what moves the player around, which is an invisible armor stand with a block on its head. So each time I move around, that armor stand is going to get teleported 4 blocks in any set direction, as long as the block in front of it is set to air. Now this is where the maze layout is going to come into play, as we're able to move around wherever we want, but the moment we hit a barrier block, it stops me from being able to go outside the build. Then finally, to leave a trail of blocks behind the player, one last command block is going to fill in the area behind me with white concrete if I'm player 1, or snow blocks if I'm player 2. Now by that I don't mean that there's going to be 2 different players, but instead it's what I've decided to name the different armor stands, with player 1 moving the cake and player 2 moving the lightning bolt. And with all of that now put together, I'm able to connect the 2 cake icons by moving around with WA, S and D and draw a line between the 2 to connect the 2 nodes. Now once I get on top of the other icon, the commands are going to swap everything over to player 2, so now I'm able to play around as the lightning bolt and do the exact same thing. I hope you're sticking with me here, as if you thought that that was going to be the most complicated part, I'm unfortunately going to have to break the bad news to you. It's only going to get more complicated. So now that I'm able to move around and draw a line between the 2 nodes, the next step is setting up restrictions to where I can't go and reset the line if I cross another one. Now this works in the exact same way for both players, so I'm going to make this easier for us and just go over player 1. So to keep track of the path I have taken, a marker is going to spawn on top of the player if there isn't another one already within a 1 block radius. Now what a marker does is act as a placeholder entity that can still be teleported to and given tags, but doesn't count as an actual entity, so it's going to reduce the amount of lag inside this map. It's the first time I've ever used any of these for any project of mine, however you're going to see a lot more of these even in just this video. Now once I've moved to another position, this second command block is then going to change the tag of the marker, which is then going to cause it to reset if I go on top of it. So if I backtrack or connect back to the same line that I'm already in, I'll have to start the line over again, which obviously needs to change position depending on which layout is active. This leads us to this block of command blocks right here, which are all of the things that need to be reset. So for example, if layout 1 is active and player 2 is the one playing and they get within 1 block from player 1, this command block is then going to send an output, which is then going to teleport player 2 back to their original spawn point. Then after that, it's going to replace all snow blocks with cyan concrete, so that way the line gets erased, and then finally this command block is going to set the direction to 0, so that way the player is no longer moving in any direction. Now finally is this command block right here, which is going to kill all of the markers, that way I'm able to move around again and try and reconnect the nodes. So each platform has its own set of commands, as the blocks and entities are going to change position every time a new platform gets activated every time. All that's left now is for the exit system for when I beat the game to power the command blocks needed to let me move along. Now most of this is just for the title command or play sound commands, but there are a few scoreboards that need to be reset so that way everything's ready for the next time I play. Now soon after that, I'll then be given back all of my normal items again, like the mask and the Faz wrench, before this final command block here is going to power, which is going to keep track of the amount of security nodes that I've turned off. This is once again another scoreboard that's going to be used very often, and is going to come in handy later on. And that finally wraps up the security node system, which honestly took me a lot longer than I'd like to admit to set up correctly. I know that I didn't go over every single command, but I try my best not to overwhelm things and to leave out most of the decorative stuff. There's probably a much easier and effective way of doing this, however I'm still really proud with how all of this turned out. That was a lot of command blocks to go over, so thank you all for bearing with me as I tried to explain it all. But now moving on to the next bit, a small particle display is going to remove the node from the build itself, before then opening the path for me to continue on forward. This is where the next camera station and conduit show up, but we're going to ignore those and instead take a look at something which I think is a lot cooler. With the first security node deactivated, Mexus has now become an active part of the map and will start to appear if the AR mask is left on for too long. Now I have already made an entire video dedicated to making Mexus and how they work, however I decided to rebuild everything from the ground up to give this updated one a lot more polish. The model for Mexus actually works in the exact same way as the floor bots do, as along with the 6 normal armor stands, there's a base armor stand holding everything together that's always rotating to face towards me. This is especially useful as Mexus uses an invisible zombie to move around, and it won't always look directly at me when it's chasing after me. Now remember when I said that there's going to be a lot more markers in this video? Well, this is one of those times, as originally Mexus would have teleported to a random armor stand dedicated for them to spawn at. But now I've replaced all of those armor stands with tagged markers and added a whole lot more of them. This makes the spawn be a lot less predictable than before, while also not increasing the entity count. And to specify which area Mexus should spawn in, the system is going to teleport the zombie to a random marker within a 10 to 15 block radius away from me. This stops Mexus from spawning all the way in the Roxy Raceway if I'm still just in Monty Golf. A scoreboard timer then cycles between making Mexus invisible by removing all the armor from the stands, and then adding them back again along with some blue dust particles when it becomes visible again. As Mexus gets closer, a few command blocks detect the distance and change the pose to give Mexus a stalking pose at 7 or more blocks away, then to a waving stance when the zombie is within 7 blocks away from me. Finally, at 2 blocks or less, Mexus is going to hold out its hand as it catches the player and calls out for Monty. Before taking a look at Monty though, let's quickly see how to make Mexus despawn, which is actually a very simple concept. The moment I put the mask on, a scoreboard timer counts up to 400 ticks or 20 realized seconds, which is when Mexus is going to teleport up to the build. Now taking the mask off, however, is going to reverse that timer and start counting down, which is then going to teleport it out of the build again once it reaches 0. And to be completely honest with you, Monty works in almost the exact same way, as when Mexus calls out for him, a zombie takes control over the model, which is then going to start walking towards me like any other normal zombie would. Another set of tagged markers decide where he's going to spawn by teleporting the zombie within a 10 to 15 block range away from Mexus. This stops Monty from spawning right on top of me and causing the game to instantly end. The model's animation is the exact same that it's always been, but now that the zombie has a chance to stop moving, I've added a movement detector to stop the arm's animation from playing if the zombie is standing still. With the added sound effects, it's a lot easier to tell if Monty is going after you or not. Unlike Mexus though, this doesn't stop when taking the mask off, as Monty's armor gets set back to normal and the zombie teleports up to the normal build along with the player. As for the jump scare, this plays out a little differently than any I've made before, as a game with free roam has a chance to shove you into a wall if a sequence plays out in the right or wrong place. So a third set of markers has been added, which is going to force the jump scare to play in a set position where there are no extra blocks blocking the way. This might sound like a cheap and lazy fix, but it actually works quite well by teleporting both the player and Monty to the nearest marker with a few blocks of open space around it. Your options are that, or either having a jump scare make it so that Monty breaks the laws of physics to kill you. Now, is it funny? Absolutely. But is it something that I want to happen? Yeah, I think it would be funny though if I left one of these around the map. The animation is once again pretty simple, as it just has Monty's head move to chomp towards the player. That said, the player also has their own set of animations, as Cassie puts her arms out to try and stop Monty from grabbing her. So 2 additional armor stands get teleported relative to the player, and have their own set of animations where the armor stand's legs look like they're holding onto Monty's jaw. Now during this sequence, you'll notice that my point of view has changed to be at floor level since Monty jumps down and pins me to the floor. But instead of teleporting the player into the block itself like how I did this originally, instead I've changed the player scale with an attribute command which still does the exact same effect without needing to add even more command blocks for the animation. Now this can still take a few hours to put together, but I still always love how these jump scares turn out, especially with ones as unique as Ruins. Speaking of being unique, there are a few times in this map where I've decided to move away from what's seen in Ruin and either change it or make it different in my own way. One of these is the game over screen right after the jump scare, which would normally just be a static background with some text on it. This is something that I've never really put thought into, as every FNAF game has done this, so I decided to change this up for this map and have Mexes stare at the player in the background as the game over text appears on screen. This is a separate build in the center of the map which is going to be used over and over again for every animatronic jump scare. Adding on to that though, the next room over then shows off which animatronic specifically killed you by having a bonus model in the center of the room. Right now only Monty has been added, but this will later show off everyone from the ruined Glamrocks to even the different variations of the Mimic. This is a pretty small addition that doesn't change anything at all, but I think that small changes like this will eventually add up to make this map stand out even more. Now as of right now, the only options are to go back to the last saved checkpoint or to restart the chapter from the very beginning. A menu option will be added later, but I'd like to finish working on more than one chapter beforehand. Now the checkpoints are decided by how many security nodes have currently been disabled, so one of these command blocks is going to send an output, which is then going to power the commands to reset everything between the current node and the one after it. This is why you see so many command blocks here, and especially even more so when resetting the entire chapter, as there are hundreds of scoreboards, clone commands and teleport commands that make sure everything goes back to normal. A side note that I want to bring up though is that this isn't going to affect the floor bots or the collectibles, so no matter how often I die, those are always going to be saved in a separate system. It was very rude of Security Breach to not have this in the base game, and it was a lot easier for me not to do this since I didn't have to add even more command blocks. As you can tell, I have a very lazy mindset when it comes to game design. For being a chapter dedicated to introducing the main mechanics though, Monty Golf has a lot of gameplay scattered around. There's a lot more interesting events compared to the prologue, especially around the second half of the chapter. Some of my favorites are the small sequence after the second security node, where a distorted version of the Monty Golf theme plays, which I managed to recreate a small part of by using a mix of playsound commands. Now you can call me an insane person for everything I've done so far in this build, but I'm not crazy enough to recreate a 4-minute song without the use of a resource or data pack. And as a reminder, I'm not going to be using any of those throughout this build. Another small but fun event takes place right after that, which is when Monty appears underneath the crawl space before it collapses right on top of him. Now this was another quick and easy addition, as I've reused Monty's same crawling animation, but just added some clone commands to make the blocks on top of him fall over. And as a reminder, all events like this also happen in the AR world, so there are 2 pairs of command blocks that make sure both versions of the build change along with the gameplay. This also goes for the animatronics, like when Monty appears at the office gate and tries to break his way through, which is a sequence that I knew I needed to add. The model is placed just between the iron bars, so it looks like Monty is reaching through the gaps, all while his arms are positioned in ways that looks like he's holding on with one hand and reaching out to the player with his other. But it's the sounds that really sell this sequence, as it's a mix of chain blocks and evoker fans that recreate the original sound surprisingly well in a Minecraft form. Of course, this isn't just for looks though, as if I get too close to Monty, he will then jump through the gate and power the jump scare. Now at this point, it's been a while since the last camera system, but luckily for us, Chapter 1 ends with not only a camera station, but a camera station with a brand new gameplay feature. Sometimes instead of luring away an animatronic, there are anomalies hidden in the cameras and have to be quarantined to unlock the way forward. It's very similar to the game I'm on Observation Duty, which also has the player look for changes hidden in different rooms. In Ruin though, these are exclusive in the AR world, where an object is going to appear in the main camera, and a duplicate will be found somewhere else. Once on the same camera as it, a title will then let the player know that there's something there, and a brand new quarantine item is going to be given to the player to interact with it. This then causes the item to flash a magenta color, before then disappearing and opening up the way forward. For this example, the object is a Monty cutout, and finding it removes the TV screen to finally move us on to Chapter 2 inside the daycare. Now while that covers all of the gameplay for this entire chapter, there's still one last thing that I want to go over, as not only is it important, but I also think that I did a really good job adding this feature. Throughout the gameplay, you'll have noticed that I collected multiple gift boxes with different items, as well as a random backpack in the corner of my inventory. Well, the two of these are actually connected, as I didn't just want the collectibles to be a random block with some text on screen, but I wanted a way to see the physical objects themselves. And by equipping the backpack item on my head, I'm able to do just that, as I'm then going to be taken to a completely separate room outside the Pizzaplex. This is what I've been calling the collection hallway, where all of the collected items are going to be shown off on a pedestal on either side of the walkway. As you can see, there are currently 5 items on display here, as I've collected every item from Chapter 1, with those being the AR Monty plush, the AR Bonnie pinata, the AR Nightmare plush, comic page 5, and the tragedy mask. Every time I click on the interaction over a prize box, the block is then going to get removed, and then a redstone block powers the commands over at the prize hall. The prizes themselves are scaled down armor stands with different models, such as a T-posed character for the pinatas, a sitting character for the plushies, and a simple player head for the mask. Each is labeled with a text display above them, and walking up to them will cause text to appear to read out the item description. This also goes for the comic page, but the item itself is a little bit different, as it shows off a custom image instead of just a character model. Now this artwork was still made without the use of mods or texture packs, and it's actually a highly detailed map art of the actual comic page from Ruin. Once the player is done admiring the artwork though, the door at the start of the hallway then returns them back to their last save point at the security node checkpoint. Again, these collectibles will always be saved, but it's important to know how much progress that might be lost if going to the collection hall at the wrong time. I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts on what your favorite part is so far, or what you think about these custom additions, as while I am sticking to the source material, I can't help but find it fun adding my own spin on things such as the jump scare menu and these collectibles. As always, you can either tell me down in the comments as I read every single one of them, or even in person on a live stream every weekend. By the time that this video comes out, I will have already planned the next ones, so make sure to stop on by when I'm live. And again, if you did enjoy this video and are looking forward to seeing Chapter 2, make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on so that way you don't miss out on that when it drops. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.